I didn't notice the moment my daughter began treating me like a stranger. If you had asked me when it started, I wouldn't have been able to tell you. There was no argument, no dramatic fight, no single conversation where everything suddenly changed. It happened quietly, the way many things in life do. Slowly. Almost politely. And for a long time, I convinced myself that nothing had changed at all. My name is Thomas. I'm 70 years old now, and I still live in the same house where my daughter grew up. It's a modest place at the edge of a quiet neighborhood. 2 bedrooms upstairs, a small living room that always seems warmer in the evenings, and a kitchen where the afternoon sun still hits the table the same way it did 30 years ago. Back when my daughter Emma was young, this house never stayed quiet for very long. Emma was the kind of child who filled every room she entered. She had this bright, restless energy that seemed to move ahead of her like a breeze. When she was little, you could hear her footsteps running down the hallway before you even saw her. Her laughter had a way of echoing through the house. Even now, sometimes when the house is especially quiet, I almost expect to hear it again. Emma was born in the spring of 1988. I remember that day more clearly than I remember what I had for breakfast yesterday. Hospitals have a certain smell that never quite leaves your memory, and I can still picture the way the sunlight came through the window of that room when the nurse first placed her in my arms. She was smaller than I expected. Her entire hand wrapped around the tip of my finger, and in that moment something inside me shifted in a way I couldn't explain. Before Emma was born, I thought I understood what responsibility meant. But holding your child for the first time changes the definition of that word forever. When she was growing up, Emma and I had a routine. Every Saturday morning we went to the small diner on the corner of Maple Street. It wasn't anything special. Just a place with squeaky vinyl booths and a waitress named Linda who had worked there longer than anyone could remember. But Emma loved it. She always ordered pancakes with strawberries, even when she was so small that she could barely finish half of them. While we sat there, she told me about school, about the friends she liked and the ones she didn't, about the small dramas that only exist in the world of children. Sometimes she would ask questions that made me laugh. "Dad, do grown-ups ever get scared?" "Of course," I told her once. "Of what?" "Of things they can't control." She thought about that for a moment, then nodded as if she had just learned an important secret about the world. After breakfast we usually walked home together. Emma liked to hold my hand when she was younger. Later, when she grew older, she pretended not to need to. But every now and then, if we crossed a busy street, she would reach out automatically without even thinking about it. Those small habits stay in a parent's memory longer than almost anything else. Emma's mother, Susan, used to say that Emma had my stubbornness and her curiosity. I think she was right. Emma was always asking questions. When she was 8 years old, she spent 2 weeks building a small science lab in the corner of the garage. It consisted mostly of jars filled with leaves, rocks, and water she collected from the backyard. One evening she came running into the house holding a jar full of muddy water. "Dad, look," she said. "What am I looking at?" I asked. "Life." There were tiny insects moving around inside the jar. She had discovered them while digging near the garden. I remember kneeling beside her in the garage while she explained, with great seriousness, how the world was probably full of small things we didn't notice. "People miss a lot," she said. At the time, I thought it was just something a curious child might say. But over the years, I've come to realize that Emma might have been right about that. People do miss a lot. The years moved quickly after that. Emma grew taller. Her voice changed. Her interests shifted from science experiments to school dances and music I didn't quite understand. The house changed with her. Her bedroom door stayed closed more often. Her weekends filled with plans that didn't always include me. But that's how growing up works. Parents slowly step back while their children step forward into the world. Even then, though, Emma and I still had our routines. Sometimes we watched movies together on Sunday nights. Sometimes we sat at the kitchen table while she did homework and I read the newspaper. She used to ask my opinion about things. Not always big things. Sometimes it was just about a book she was reading or a decision about school. But she asked? That mattered. The day Emma left for college was one of the quietest days this house had ever known. Susan cried during the drive back home. I tried to stay calm for her, but when we pulled into the driveway and Emma's bedroom window was dark, something inside my chest felt unexpectedly hollow. The house didn't feel empty exactly, but it felt different. For the first year after she left, Emma called often. Sometimes late at night. Sometimes while walking across campus between classes. She told us about her professors, her roommates, the strange feeling of living somewhere that was no longer home but wasn't quite unfamiliar either. When she came back during holidays, the house filled with noise again. Suitcases in the hallway. Music from her bedroom. The smell of her favorite meals cooking in the kitchen. It felt like time had briefly reversed itself. After graduation, Emma found a job in another city. It wasn't terribly far away, about 3 hours by car. Close enough for visits, we told ourselves. And for a while, that's exactly what happened. Emma came home for holidays. Sometimes she stopped by for a weekend. She sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee while telling us about work. Susan always made too much food. Emma always laughed about it. But slowly, almost without us noticing, things began to change. The visits became shorter. The phone calls less frequent. Emma sounded busier each time we spoke. Work, she said. Life, she said. Susan passed away 6 years ago. It happened quickly. Too quickly for either of us to fully understand what was happening at the time. After the funeral, Emma stayed for a few days. She helped organize some paperwork, made phone calls, handled things I couldn't quite focus on. At night we sat together in the living room without saying very much. Grief has a way of filling a room even when no one speaks. Before she left, Emma hugged me in the doorway. "Call me if you need anything," she said. "I will," I replied. And I meant it. For the first year after Susan died, Emma called regularly. Sometimes twice a week. Sometimes just to ask if I had eaten dinner. Sometimes just to talk. Those conversations helped more than she probably realized. The house felt less quiet when her voice was on the phone. But gradually, over time, the calls changed. They didn't disappear completely. They simply became different. Shorter. More formal somehow. At first, I told myself it was normal. She had a demanding job. A busy life. But there was one moment I remember clearly now. It happened about a year ago. Emma had come to visit for the weekend. We were sitting at the kitchen table drinking coffee. The same table where she used to do homework when she was a teenager. She looked around the room for a moment. Then she said something in a tone that sounded oddly distant. "This house hasn't changed at all." I smiled. "I suppose it hasn't." She nodded politely. But there was something in her expression that I couldn't quite place. Not sadness. Not frustration. Just distance. The kind of distance you sometimes see when someone is visiting a place that used to belong to them. That afternoon she left earlier than expected. She said she had work to do. Before she walked out the door, she gave me a quick hug. It was polite. Warm even. But brief. As if she were hugging someone she respected, rather than someone she had once run to when she was afraid of thunderstorms. After she drove away, I stood in the doorway for a moment watching the empty street. And for the first time in my life, a quiet thought crossed my mind. When had my daughter begun speaking to me the same way people speak to strangers? That question stayed with me long after the sound of her car had faded down the road. For a long time after that visit, I tried to convince myself that the thought had been unfair. Parents have a habit of overthinking things when they grow older. Silence in the house stretches moments longer than they probably deserve. A short conversation can feel like something deeper simply because there isn't much else happening around it. So I told myself I was imagining the distance. Emma had a career. A busy life. Responsibilities that kept her moving from one day to the next. Of course, she sounded different sometimes. Life changes people. Still, once that thought had crossed my mind, I found myself paying closer attention. The next time Emma called was about 3 weeks later. I was in the kitchen making coffee when the phone rang. Her name appeared on the screen the way it always had, and the familiar warmth spread through my chest. That small feeling never changed. No matter how old you get, seeing your child's name appear on your phone still carries the same quiet joy. "Hi, Dad," she said. Her voice sounded calm. A little distracted. "Hi, sweetheart." For a moment we spoke about ordinary things. The weather. A storm that had passed through the city where she lived. A small problem with the heater in her apartment building. Then the conversation slowed. Emma asked a few polite questions. "How have you been? Have you been keeping busy?" I answered the way I always did. "Oh, you know. The usual." I told her about the maple tree in the backyard losing its leaves earlier than usual that year. About the neighbor's dog that had developed a strange habit of barking at the mail truck every morning. She listened quietly. But something about the conversation felt careful. Not warm. Not cold. Just careful. As if we were both stepping around something invisible in the room between us. When the call ended, I placed the phone on the counter and stared at it for a moment. It had been a normal conversation. Nothing wrong with it. But something about it left a faint feeling behind that I couldn't quite explain. I thought about Emma's voice. The way she spoke. The tone she used when she asked about my day. There had been a time when she spoke to me with a kind of easy familiarity that belonged only to family. Now the words sounded more formal. Polite. The kind of tone people use when speaking to someone they don't see very often. At first I tried to ignore the thought. But once you begin noticing small differences, they appear everywhere. A few months later Emma visited again. It was early autumn. The trees along our street had just begun turning yellow and orange, and the air had that cool smell that always reminds me of the start of the school year. She arrived in the late afternoon. When I opened the door, she smiled the same way she always had. But again, there was that strange sense of distance. Like she was stepping into a place that belonged to someone else. "Hi, Dad," she said. "Hi, Emma." We hugged. The hug lasted a second or two. Just long enough to feel polite. Then she stepped inside. Her suitcase rolled softly across the wooden floor as she pulled it toward the hallway. "You didn't have to bring so much," I said. "It's just for the weekend," she replied. Her voice sounded light, almost cheerful. But the house didn't seem to fill with her presence the way it used to. When Emma was younger, her arrival always changed the atmosphere immediately. Rooms felt brighter. Noise returned to the quiet spaces. This time the house stayed almost exactly the same. We ate dinner together that evening. I cooked one of the meals she used to love when she was a teenager. Lemon chicken with roasted potatoes. She thanked me politely. "It's really good," she said. But she ate slowly, glancing at her phone a few times during the meal. At one point she apologized. "Sorry, work has been a little hectic lately." I nodded. "I understand." And I did. At least I told myself I did. After dinner we sat in the living room for a while. The television played quietly in the background while we talked about small things. Her job. The city where she lived. A few stories about coworkers I had never met. At one point I told her about the old diner on Maple Street. "Linda retired last month," I said. Emma looked up. "Really? 40 years she worked there." Emma smiled faintly. "I remember that place." For a moment I thought she might say more. Maybe something about our Saturday breakfasts. Maybe something about pancakes with strawberries. But she didn't. Instead, she nodded politely and took a sip of tea. Later that evening she said she was tired and went upstairs earlier than expected. I stayed in the living room after she left. The house was quiet again. But not the comfortable kind of quiet I had grown used to. This felt like something else. The next morning we drank coffee together in the kitchen. The same sunlight still fell across the table through the window. Emma sat across from me, stirring her coffee slowly. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then she looked around the room again. "You've kept everything the same," she said. I shrugged slightly. "I guess I never saw much reason to change it." She nodded. "That makes sense." Again, the tone felt polite, respectful, but distant. And suddenly I remembered something from many years earlier. Emma had been about 10 years old. She had fallen off her bicycle in the driveway and scraped her knee badly. She came running into the house crying. I remember sitting her on the kitchen counter while I cleaned the cut and put a bandage over it. "Does it still hurt?" I asked. She nodded. Then she said something that made me smile. "It hurts less when you're here." Children say things like that without realizing how much they matter. Sitting across from her now, 25 years later, I wondered when that feeling had disappeared. Or if it had simply been replaced by something else. Emma left that afternoon. She hugged me again at the door. "Call me if you need anything," she said. "I will." Then she walked to her car. I stood on the porch watching her drive away. The street grew quiet again. And for the first time, a realization settled slowly into my mind. My daughter wasn't being unkind. She wasn't angry. She wasn't distant in a cruel way. She was simply careful. The way people are careful when they're around someone they care about, but don't fully understand anymore. That evening I sat alone at the kitchen table. The same place where Emma had once done homework while telling me stories about her day. And I asked myself a question I had been avoiding for months. Somewhere along the way, had my daughter stopped seeing me as the man who raised her, and started seeing me as someone she no longer knew? For a long time after Emma's visit, that question stayed with me. Not loudly. Not in a way that demanded immediate answers. It simply lingered in the quiet corners of the house, appearing during small moments of the day when my mind had nothing else to focus on. While making coffee in the morning? While watering the plants Susan had once cared for so carefully near the window? While sitting in the living room in the evenings when the television played softly but no one was really watching? I thought about the way Emma spoke now. Not unkindly. Never that. Just carefully. As if she were speaking to someone she respected, someone she didn't want to offend. But also someone she didn't fully know anymore. That realization felt strange at first. Because for most of my life, Emma had been the person who knew me best. She had seen me tired after long days at work. She had seen me laugh until tears filled my eyes during old comedies we watched together. She had seen me cry once too, the night Susan passed away. She had been there for all of it. Or at least she had been there once. The next time Emma called was about a month later. I was sitting on the back porch watching the sun set behind the trees when the phone rang. Her name appeared on the screen again. The same small warmth appeared in my chest. "Hi, Dad," she said. "Hi, Emma." For a moment we spoke about ordinary things again. Work. Weather. Her city. Then, after a brief pause, she asked something that surprised me. "Have you been lonely?" The question arrived so suddenly that I wasn't sure how to answer at first. I looked out across the yard. The maple tree was nearly bare now. Leaves scattered across the grass. "I've been all right," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "I worry about you sometimes," she said softly. That surprised me even more. "Why's that?" "I don't know," she replied. "I guess I don't always know what your life is like anymore." There was something honest in the way she said it. Something unguarded. For the first time in a long while, the careful tone in her voice disappeared. And suddenly I understood something I hadn't realized before. The distance I had been feeling might not belong entirely to her. Maybe some of it belonged to me too. After Susan died, I had quietly retreated into routines. Morning coffee. Evening television. Small conversations with neighbors. But I hadn't told Emma very much about those days. When she asked how I was doing, I always answered the same way. "I'm fine." The truth was simpler. Life had become quieter. But quiet doesn't always mean lonely. Still, Emma had no way of knowing that. Because I had never told her. I guess life is a little quieter now, I said after a moment. She didn't interrupt. I told her about the garden I had started planting again. About the old diner finally closing after Linda retired. About the stray cat that sometimes wandered into the yard and sat near the porch in the evenings. None of it was dramatic. Just small pieces of a quiet life. But Emma listened carefully. The conversation lasted longer than usual. Almost an hour. And something inside it felt different. Less careful. More familiar. A week later Emma called again. Then again the following weekend. The conversations grew easier. Not perfect. Not exactly the same as when she was young. But warmer. One evening she said something that made me pause. I think we got a little lost for a while, she admitted. What do you mean? I think after Mom died, we both kind of stopped talking about things. She was right. Grief does that sometimes. It rearranges relationships in quiet ways. Not through arguments or anger. Just through silence. Neither of us had known quite how to fill the space Susan left behind. And so we had both stepped back, unsure how to move forward again. A few months later Emma came to visit once more. It was spring this time. The same season when she had been born. When I opened the door, she smiled the way she always had. But this time the smile reached her eyes. Hi, Dad. Hi, Emma. She hugged me. And this time the hug lasted longer. Not dramatically longer. Just long enough to feel natural. Inside the house she walked slowly through the living room. Looking at the photographs on the shelf. The same ones that had always been there. She stopped in front of one of them. A picture of her at about 8 years old, standing beside the maple tree in the backyard. You remember this? I asked. She smiled. That was the day we built the birdhouse. You were convinced birds would move in immediately. They did eventually. Yes, I said. They did. We spent most of that afternoon talking. Not just about work or schedules. But about memories. About Susan. About things neither of us had mentioned in years. At one point Emma said something quietly that stayed with me. I think for a while I forgot how to talk to you, she said. Why? She shrugged. I guess I started thinking of you as older. I laughed softly. Well, I suppose I am. She shook her head. That's not what I mean. She looked around the kitchen. I kept thinking you were living a completely different life now. In some ways I am, I said. But in most ways, I'm still the same person. She smiled faintly. I guess I forgot that. Later that evening, after she left again, I stood for a moment in the doorway watching her car disappear down the street. The air was warm. The same quiet neighborhood around me. But something felt lighter. Because I had learned something important. Sometimes when people grow older, relationships don't break. They simply drift. Not out of anger. Not out of rejection. Just out of small misunderstandings and quiet assumptions that build up over time. And sometimes all it takes to find your way back is a simple conversation that probably should have happened sooner. That night, as I turned off the lights in the kitchen, I looked once more at the empty chair across the table. For a long time I had believed my daughter had started treating me like a stranger. But now I understood something different. We hadn't become strangers at all. We had simply forgotten, for a little while, how to find our way back to being family again.